actual amount we're going to use. So does that enough salt?
For this much cabbage?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah. I would like to make a very basic kimchi. This is basically how we make kimchi in our factory.
There are many different styles of kimchi that one can make, but we're just going to start with the basic Napa cabbage kimchi, and then we'll talk a little bit about riffs and other versions that you can make, varieties.
The history of kimchi and where it comes from. It comes from Asia, and most people, when they think of kimchi, they think of the baichu kimchi, which is a Napa cabbage kimchi. The Napa cabbage originates from Beijing area, and it's grown all over Asia. In Beijing, in Mandarin-speaking China, this is called bai cai. In southern regions, bok choy, and in Korea, it's baekju.
And they're often like, 5 times
Yeah,
as big as that.
this is kind of
so
a
like
baby one. It's a winter crop. People used to grow them to survive long, hard winters, as they have in the north of Asia. One of the Asian style or Korean style bai cais is going to be this sort of radius in comparison to this rather genteel cabbage that we have right here.
But you can, we're going to demonstrate the Napa cabbage model again, and you can play with that a little bit. Sometimes people like to play with Savoy. It's not traditional, but you can use it. And then there's also lots of other kinds of kimchis using other bases as well, right?
People use, I've made kale and collards kimchi. People use daikon radish or other root vegetables to make kimchi. You could use carrots to make kimchi. You use just plain old cabbage to make kimchi too.
Yeah. I think sort of the Korean food craze in the U.S., along with sort of interest in making things yourself and sort of fermentation in general, has really kind of brought kimchi back into the sort of the U.S. and lots of different types of eaters' palates.
Kimchi is really a cultural phenomenon in Korea. It is something that everybody in Korea participates in. At the end of the season, around November to December time, when things are starting to get cold and the vegetables in the field are, you have to harvest them, otherwise it's too late. There's almost a festival. It's called Kimjang in Korea, where everybody will get their cabbage for the year, and they will preserve their family's kimchi for the year. You hear of grandmas digging holes under the ground to keep their kimchi all winter long.
But yeah, it's a very sort of family tradition and something that's fun to make together.
And every different region has its own specific kind that they make. So whatever the region offers, so say you're by the ocean side, you're going to use fish sauce from that region, or you're going to wash your cabbage in the ocean. Yeah. Or if you're from the high mountains, you're going to put roots in your kimchi. So every region has its own distinct style. Why is kimchi good for you? Why is this tradition making a comeback right now?
Well, one of the things I think that sort of interests us initially, and is part of why people I think are getting into fermentation, is that in these cultures where people eat a lot of fermented foods, Korea being one of them, but sort of Eastern Europe and Russia and places where scientists are studying what people eat, and they're feeling like, wow, these people have really strong immune systems, and they seem to be really vital in cultures where it can be very cold or there's a lot of intense environmental factors. So what's that all about? And so you sort of, pop the lid off and look into fermentation a bit, and it's this sort of the process of it sitting and bubbling and becoming both very tasty and sour, but also highly probiotic.
It's interesting, the science behind fermentation. We're just catching up to that science. Just recently, in the past 5 years, scientists have mapped the microbiome, and you'll see in newspaper articles and magazine articles, every month you see something is in the news about what scientists are discovering about the microbiome. So we're only just tapping into this very complex organic science that's happening when fermentation happens. Yet, however, it is ancient knowledge. Mm-hmm. People have used this method of preservation to preserve vegetables through the winter, before refrigeration, before modernization, before industrialization. This is age-old knowledge.
It's sort of a nascent science in a way, although it's very ancient tradition, but the whole study of the human microbiome and the sort of bacterial universe that exists within us is something we're just sort of scratching the surface on. But it certainly seems that most cultures where they eat a lot of fermented foods, people tend to experience a lot of vitality and sort of boosted immune and longevity as a result. So some of it is sort of wives' tale, some of it is cutting edge science, and I think for home fermenters, it's just a great, fun culinary experience as well. So what about the safety of it and how people are doing it all over the world and how we do it?
I love to touch on safety because I think it's a basic paradigm shift of understanding fermented food versus canned food. When we think of preserved food in America, we think of canned food. So a ball jar is a perfect example of canning. This is what we think of when we think of home canning. Now, in canning, what we do is we invite all the bacteria that's on the food into the jar. And then we heat the jar up
To a specific temperature.
and for a specific period of time to kill absolutely all the bacteria that's in the jar, making it shelf stable and safe to eat, hence preserving the food.
Yeah, and anybody who's ever canned has felt the like anxiety around that a little bit because you're like, did I do it long enough? Because if you don't, there's definitely issues that can arise.
Well, the number of microbes that could hurt you are actually relatively slim compared to the number of microbes that exist in the world that help you. However, if you do catch one of those ones that are bad for you, they're pretty darn bad. They can wipe out life. The one that everybody thinks of is botulism, and that's the only microbe, or the only bad microbe that can survive in high heat. So canning, actually, you should be worried about because you're creating a very specific environment where you could be breeding the one bad bacteria that's going to kill you and everybody who eats your canned peas. So I want to dispel that idea because fermentation is a different thing. What you do is you invite everybody into the jar. However, what you're doing is you're creating a situation or a means to kill all the bad bacteria. And you're kind of farming lactobacillus.
Yeah, you're creating
an environment where the good bacteria will defeat the bad bacteria. And we'll talk about how to create an anaerobic situation in your ferment later on. And then also acidity. We're going for a low pH. Now, for certain ferments, we actually can do things to lower the pH at the beginning just to give the lactobacillus a head start. Or we just make sure that the pH is low enough so we have enough acidity at the end of our fermentation process. And when the pH is below 4.5, sour like tasting a lemon, we know that can be none of the bad bacteria can survive in such a low pH. Botulism, Salmonella, Listeria,
E. coli.
E. coli. All the bad guys that we usually look out for cannot exist in that low pH. So we know at that point that we have succeeded. We've created something that is safe and tasty and health-giving.